The first hints of winter had already begun to spread their icy fingers across the countryside when Evelyn Matthews found herself walking alone along a quiet, rural road. The sky hung heavy and gray, clouds pulled tight like a blanket ready to drop snow at any moment. Her thin coat, once a pleasant shade of blue, had faded under years of wear, and the buttons no longer fastened properly. Each gust of wind cut through the fabric and into her bones, yet she pressed forward, clutching the strap of her worn satchel as if it were the one possession tethering her. To the world. Evelyn had nowhere left to go. The little rental home she had been staying in had been reclaimed by the owner, who gently but firmly told her she could no longer remain without income. Her savings had trickled away after her husband's passing, and the small job she once relied on had dried up as her age and frailty made work more difficult. Now she walked because walking was better than sitting still and feeling the full weight of her circumstances. The countryside was quiet, the kind of quiet that only large open spaces could hold. Frost clung to the grass, and the trees stood like silent sentinels watching her slow progress. Each breath she exhaled created a faint puff that drifted away like a ghost of everything she had lost. She whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed in the long months of solitude, just a bit further, just until you find shelter. Meanwhile, miles down the road, rancher Luke Harrington was driving home after picking up supplies from town. His truck rattled over the gravel, the bed filled with feed for his cattle and a bag of warm clothes for his 3 children. He was tired, the kind of tired that settled deep in a man's bones after years of shouldering every burden alone. The approaching winter always worsened that heaviness. There were fences to mend, animals to shelter, and creeks that would soon freeze solid. And above all, there were the children Emma, Caleb, and baby Rose, who depended entirely on him. As he rounded a bend, Luke slowed his truck, noticing a frail figure in the distance. At first, he assumed she was a traveler or perhaps someone whose car had broken down. But as he drew nearer, concern flared. The woman moved slowly, her steps unsteady, her shoulders hunched against the cold. She looked one harsh gust away from collapsing. He pulled the truck to the side of the road and stepped out. "Ma'am?" he called gently. Evelyn startled, clinging to her satchel. Up close, she looked even more fragile, cheeks hollowed by hunger, silver hair disheveled by the wind. Yet her eyes, though tired, held a quiet dignity. "I'm fine," she said quickly, lifting her chin. "Just passing through." Luke frowned. "You'll freeze out here. The temperature is dropping fast." "I'll manage," she insisted. Though her trembling hands betrayed her, he hesitated, aware that strangers didn't always welcome help. But something about her reminded him painfully of his late mother, lonely, proud, and far too willing to go without rather than be a burden. His voice softened. "Please," he said, "let me drive you somewhere warm, even just to the town diner." Evelyn's defenses cracked for a moment. She swayed on her feet, and Luke instinctively reached out to steady her. The touch was gentle, reassuring. She exhaled shakily. "Maybe just for a moment," she whispered. Luke helped her into the truck, turning up the heat. As they drove toward his ranch, closer than the town diner and far safer with the storm approaching, Evelyn stared out the window, wondering if fate had given her one last chance at shelter, or something far more unexpected. When Luke turned his truck onto the long dirt drive leading to his ranch, Evelyn wasn't sure what to expect. The land stretched far, and wide rolling fields, scattered pines, and a wooden fence tracing the horizon. The house itself was large but worn, its paint faded from years of sun and wind, its porch sagging slightly on one side. It looked like a place that had weathered storms, heartbreak, and 1,000 long nights. Yet there was something warm about it too, something lived in, something that hinted at family. As Luke parked and hurried around to help her down, the front door burst open. A little girl with a braid half undone came running down the steps. "Daddy," she called. Behind her, a boy only a bit younger appeared, dragging a wooden stick like it was a sword. Inside, a baby wailed from somewhere in the house. "This is Emma and Caleb," Luke introduced, catching the girl in his arms. "And, that's Rose crying inside. She's teething." Evelyn felt a tug in her chest as Emma's bold eyes met hers. Children had always been gentle territory for her, a place where she felt useful, steady, needed. But she hadn't been around any in years, not since her son passed and the world slowly emptied of the people she cared for. "Who's she?" Caleb asked, peering up at Evelyn with an eager, curious stare. "A friend," Luke answered simply. "Someone who needs to warm up a bit." The children didn't hesitate. Emma grabbed Evelyn's hand with the confidence only a child possesses. "Come on, we'll show you the kitchen. It's warm in there because Daddy forgot to turn off the oven again." Luke muttered under his breath, embarrassed, but Evelyn only smiled. She stepped into the house, led by Emma, and the warmth hit her instantly, not just the physical heat, but the chaotic, lively energy that came with a young family trying their best. The kitchen was cluttered, but homey. A half-folded mountain of laundry sat on one chair. Crayons were scattered across the table. Pots from breakfast were still in the sink. It was not the tidy, quiet home Evelyn once maintained in her youth, but it was full of life. Full of things that mattered. "Sorry about the mess," Luke said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Things get away from me." Evelyn shook her head. "This isn't mess," she whispered. "It's living." Luke warmed some soup while Evelyn sat near the table. The baby's crying grew louder until Luke returned carrying little Rose, red-cheeked and fussy. Without thinking, Evelyn reached out her arms. Luke hesitated, then gently handed the baby over. Rose settled almost instantly against Evelyn's chest. Emma's eyes widened. "She likes you." Caleb tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Do you know stories?" "Daddy's bedtime stories are terrible." Evelyn laughed a soft, surprised sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in far too long. Luke watched quietly, leaning against the counter, realizing how natural she looked there with his children, how the room felt calmer, how the air felt warmer. After lunch, Evelyn tried to stand. "I appreciate your kindness, but I shouldn't intrude longer. I'll be on my way." The words were polite, practiced, used often by someone who had learned not to depend on anyone. But Emma wrapped her arms around Evelyn's waist. "Don't go," she said. "It's almost snowing." Caleb nodded fiercely. "Stay for tonight." "Just one night." Luke stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "They're right. The storm is coming in fast. Please. Stay until it's safe." Evelyn looked from the children to the windows, where frost was already gathering. Her heart softened in a way that frightened her. She wasn't used to belonging anywhere. "All right," she whispered. "Just until the storm passes." Emma squealed in delight. Luke exhaled in relief. And Evelyn, for the first time in years, felt the faintest quiet hope like a small candle lit inside her chest. Evelyn awoke the next morning to the soft creaking of floorboards overhead and the faint patter of little feet running across the hallway. At first, she thought she was dreaming of a home that wasn't hers, of the sound of children, of warmth. But when she opened her eyes, the soft quilt Luke had placed over her shoulders was still tucked neatly around her, and the fire in the small guest room stove still crackled with life. For a moment, she lay still, absorbing the unfamiliar comfort. Downstairs, the morning rush had already begun. Baby Rose was fussing. Caleb was arguing with Emma over a missing mitten, and Luke was trying to prepare breakfast while juggling a dozen things at once. Evelyn stepped into the kitchen just as a pot boiled over on the stove. "Oh, sorry," Luke muttered, grabbing a cloth. "Morning. Hope you slept all right." She smiled. It's been a long time since I slept that well. The children barely gave her time to settle before gathering around her. Can you braid my hair again like last night? Emma asked, thrusting a brush into her hands. Will you help me read the next chapter? Caleb added eagerly, already clutching a worn storybook. Rose reached for Evelyn with chubby hands, whimpering until Evelyn gently lifted her into her arms. The baby nuzzled into her shoulder with immediate trust. Luke watched this with a slow, dawning realization. Something in the room had changed in ease, a calm he hadn't felt in years. The chaos was still there, but it felt lighter, as if Evelyn's presence softened the edges. Evelyn braided Emma's hair with practiced fingers, humming an old tune she barely remembered. She helped Caleb sound out difficult words, praising him with warmth that made the boy glow with pride. She rocked Rose while Luke finished cooking, the baby cooing softly against her. When they sat for breakfast, Luke noticed the children kept glancing at Evelyn, as if afraid she might disappear if they blinked too long. It stirred something deep inside him, a mixture of gratitude and something like hope. After the meal, Evelyn followed the children into the living room. She tidied the blankets on the sofa, picked up scattered toys, and instinctively brought a sense of order without making the house feel sterile. She moved gently, respectfully, as though the home itself were something sacred. You don't have to do that, Luke said, watching her stack books neatly. I know, Evelyn replied, but it feels natural. And it did. As the morning turned into afternoon, she found herself slipping effortlessly into a role she hadn't realized she missed so dearly, a caregiver, a steady hand, a grandmotherly presence. The kind of woman who made a house feel like a home simply by being in it. She taught Emma how to fold laundry the grandmother way, with corners perfectly aligned. She showed Caleb how to tie proper knots from her husband's old fisherman tailies. She soothed Rose with lullabies that hadn't passed her lips in decades. And the children, so hungry for guidance and affection, absorbed every word, clung to every gesture. Luke noticed the shift too. The kids laughed more. The house felt warmer. Even he felt less weighed down when Evelyn was nearby. Her calm was like a balm on the wounds he had tried so hard to ignore. Still, Evelyn wrestled with uncertainty each night. She didn't want to impose. She didn't want to overstep. And yet, when she looked at the children, at the way they rested against her, trusted her, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. One evening, as she tucked the children into bed, Emma asked sleepily, "Are you going to stay with us forever?" The question struck Evelyn's heart with a warm ache. She smoothed Emma's hair and whispered, "I'm here for as long as I'm needed." Downstairs, Luke heard the words and felt a knot loosen in his chest. Because for the first time since losing his wife, he felt something like hope returning to his home. The storm arrived with a fury no one in the valley had expected. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to an ominous shade of iron, and the wind howled like a living thing tearing across the plains. Luke had seen dozens of winters on the ranch, but even he paused on the porch, watching the clouds swirl with a heaviness that foretold danger. The temperature was already dropping fast. Inside the house, Evelyn felt the shift in the air. She had grown up with storms like this, storms that swallowed sound and sight, storms that tested the strength of both structures and spirits. While the children played near the fire, she moved quietly through the rooms, checking windows, adjusting blankets, preparing the home with the practiced calm of someone who'd endured harsh winters long before this. "Looks bad," Luke said as he stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. "It'll be worse before it gets better," Evelyn replied softly. "Storms like this aren't just cold. They're long." Luke nodded. He could feel that too. As the first blast of snow struck the windows, rattling them in their frames, the children raced to her side. Emma grabbed Evelyn's hand. Do we have to be scared? Evelyn knelt to their level and smiled gently. No, sweetheart. A storm is only loud, not dangerous if we're safe inside. The reassurance settled the children. Even as the storm outside intensified, Luke spent the next hours hauling extra firewood inside, checking the barn doors and making sure the generator was ready. Every time he returned to the house, he saw Evelyn with the children reading by lantern light, comforting baby Rose, keeping the house warm with her presence. But just as night fell, things took a sharp turn. Caleb began coughing. At first, it was light, the kind that came from running around too long. But soon his cheeks flushed and his small body grew warm. Evelyn pressed a hand to his forehead, her expression growing tight. Luke, she called quietly, he's burning up. Luke knelt beside his son, worry flashing in his eyes. Caleb, buddy, look at me. Caleb blinked slowly, dizzy and feverish. Luke reached for his coat. I'll take him into town. The doctor, you can't, Evelyn said firmly. The road is already blocked. You'd never make it. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls and snow piled high against the windows. Luke knew she was right. He also knew Caleb's fever was rising fast. What do we do? He whispered, fear tightening his voice. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She took command with the confidence of someone who had tended sick children her entire life. We keep him hydrated. Cool his forehead. Use steam to help his breathing. And we don't leave him alone. Fevers can turn quickly. Luke's heart pounded, helplessness clawing at him. But Evelyn's steady voice grounded him. Luke, she said gently, he'll be all right. Let me help. Hours crawled by. The storm raged, snow drumming against the roof and relentless waves. But inside the house, the world narrowed to a single goal: keeping Caleb safe. Evelyn stayed at Caleb's side, cool cloth in hand, humming soft lullabies that bridged decades. Every so often, she coaxed him to sip warm herbal tea she brewed from dried leaves in the pantry. Luke hovered nearby, tending the fire, handing her whatever she needed, worry carving deeper lines into his tired face. At one point, he murmured, I don't know what we would have done without you. Evelyn didn't look up. Families help each other. The word families struck him deeply. Near dawn, Caleb's breathing eased and the fever finally broke. When the boy opened his eyes, groggy but clearer, Luke let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside him for years. Evelyn brushed Caleb's hair back and whispered, You're safe now, sweetheart. Luke watched her, emotion tightening his throat. In that moment, exhausted, grateful, and shaken, he realized something undeniable. This woman hadn't just saved his son. She had held the entire household together, and she had done it with the strength of someone who belonged there. The storm finally began to loosen its grip on the valley 2 days later. The wind softened first, tapering from a roar to a distant hum. By the third morning, the world outside lay buried beneath a thick, shimmering blanket of white quiet, still, unmoving. The roads were still closed, the drifts impossibly high. But inside the Harrington home, a different kind of warmth lingered. Caleb was recovering, though still weak, lying on the couch wrapped in quilts as Emma read to him and Rose slept in her cradle. The worst had passed. They all knew that, and much of that victory was owed to Evelyn. Luke had barely slept, but now, with his children safe, he felt a bone-deep relief. He found himself watching Evelyn often, how she moved through the house with soft steps, how she checked on Caleb every few minutes, how she instinctively soothed the baby whenever she whimpered. She had become the heart of the home without even trying, but Evelyn didn't seem to see it. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed and the house had settled into quiet, Luke found her sitting alone by the fire. She wasn't knitting or reading or doing anything at all. She simply sat, her hands folded loosely in her lap, staring at the flames as if searching for answers in the flickering light. He approached quietly. "You should rest," he said. "You've barely slept since Caleb got sick." "I've slept enough," Evelyn murmured, but her tone wasn't convincing. Her eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper. Luke pulled out the chair beside her. "Evelyn, something's on your mind." She hesitated. For a long moment, only the fire answered, crackling softly, filling the silence with its gentle warmth. Then she sighed, her voice trembling slightly. "I should leave when the road's clear." Luke blinked, taken aback. "Leave? Why?" She smiled, but it was sad. "Because this isn't my home. I never meant to stay so long. I only wanted to keep warm for a night or two, not become a burden." He frowned. "You're not a burden." But Evelyn looked down at her hands, the hands that had once cradled her own son, the hands that had held a whole life together until time slowly unraveled it. "Luke, I've lived long enough to know when I'm overstaying my welcome. I've been on my own for years now. You and the children have been kind, but kindness shouldn't be taken advantage of." Luke felt a deep ache at her words. "Is that how you see what you've done here? As an intrusion?" She swallowed. "I was needed for a moment. That moment has passed." He leaned forward, voice rough with emotion. "Evelyn, you saved my son." Her eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "Any woman with experience would have done the same." "That's not true." His voice was firm now. "You didn't just help Caleb, you've held this whole house together. You've given my children a warmth I haven't seen in years." Evelyn's breath caught, her throat tightening. "They're wonderful children, but they need someone more permanent. Someone young. Someone who stopped." Luke's voice softened, but his words were sure. "They need you." The room fell still. Evelyn blinked at him, stunned. "Me? Yes, you." He exhaled slowly. "Emma braided her hair the way you taught her. Caleb keeps asking when you'll read to him again."
Rose reaches for you before she reaches for anyone else. Evelyn.
"My children need a grandmother." Tears slipped silently down Evelyn's cheeks. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Luke's voice gentled even further. "And you need a home. Not a temporary roof. Not a warm place for a storm. A real home." For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. The firelight blurred through her tears as she whispered, I thought my life was finished. That no one needed me anymore." Luke reached out, resting a reassuring hand over hers. "You were never unwanted. You just hadn't found your way home yet." And for the first time in many, many years, Evelyn let herself believe it. Asterisk in the days that followed. The world outside remained quiet beneath winter's heavy blanket. Snow still clung to the trees like powdered sugar, and the roads were slow to clear. But inside the Harrington home, something profound had shifted, something gentle, something lasting. Evelyn no longer moved through the house like a guest afraid to touch the furniture. She moved with the ease of someone who belonged there, who had a place in every room and every routine. And the children responded to that change instantly. Emma followed her everywhere, always eager to help. "Grandma Evelyn," she said one morning, the name slipping out naturally, the way a leaf falls from a tree. She froze, worried she might have said something wrong. But when Evelyn turned, eyes filling with tender warmth, the girl threw her arms around her waist in relief. Caleb recovered fully, his energy returning with a burst of enthusiasm that filled the house with laughter and playful chaos. He clung to Evelyn's arm when she taught him how to knit a simple scarf, though he spent half the time accidentally tying the yarn into knots instead. But every accomplishment, no matter how small, made him beam at her with pride, and baby Rose, sweet, trusting Rose, seemed to think Evelyn had always been part of her world. When she took her first wobbly steps from the sofa to Evelyn's waiting hands, the entire room erupted with cheers. Luke watched with misted eyes, memorizing the moment. For Luke, the days felt lighter than they had in years. He still worked from dawn to dusk tending the ranch feeding cattle, breaking ice in the troughs, repairing gates battered by the storm, but coming home felt different now. The house glowed with life. Meals were warm. Children were happy. And Evelyn had become the steady center holding it all together. One afternoon, as the sky softened into shades of gold and lavender, Luke found himself walking toward the small storage room at the back of the house. It had once been his late wife's sewing space, then later used for tools and odds and ends. But now, after clearing out old boxes and fixing the draft in the window, he had turned it into something new, a room just for Evelyn. It wasn't large, just enough for a bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window, but he'd painted the walls a soft lilac, the color of the wildflowers Evelyn had once mentioned loving. He replaced the worn rug with a thick, warm one and added a quilt he'd bought in town years ago but never used. When it was finished, he called her softly. "Evelyn, I have something to show you." She followed him down the hall, confused but trusting. When Luke opened the door, Evelyn stepped inside and froze. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Luke," she whispered, eyes wide. "What is all this?" He swallowed, feeling strangely nervous. "A room. For you. A real room. A place that's yours." Her gaze swept the soft colors, the clean linens, the rocking chair positioned perfectly to look out at the fields. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "You belong here, Evelyn. We want you here. The children, the home, me." She turned to face him, tears brimming. "I haven't had a room of my own in years," she said softly. "Not one that felt like I was wanted in it." "You're wanted here every day," Luke said. "Not just because you help. Not just because the children adore you. But because you're family now." Evelyn pressed a trembling hand against the wall, touching the gentle lilac paint with awe. "I never thought I would have another home," she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice warm. "Then let this be the beginning of one." For a long moment, she stood in the quiet room, letting the truth settle into her bones, the truth that she was no longer wandering, no longer alone, no longer without a place in the world. She turned to Luke, her voice barely more than a breath. "I'm home," she said. And as the last light of day spilled softly across the room, it felt like the ranch itself exhaled in agreement, welcoming her not just for winter, but for all the seasons still ahead.